Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming inside into the darkness from the light to think about the future with us. This program is related to the exhibition Cult of the Machine, which I hope some of you were able to see downstairs and others will see later, which looks at the ways that artists imagine the impacts of massive technological change and shifts on society at the height of the machine age. The exhibition's subtitle, Humans, Technology, and Change, could be written about today's moment as well. And hence, we are initiating a series of programs that look at the impacts of the technological shifts that surround us on our lives now and into the future. Today's program convenes writers on the forefront of imagining and reporting on these similar social and cultural shifts. We have also organized another series that will be announced on our website later next week called Thinking Machines that will convene a series of conversations with technologists, designers, writers, thinkers of all sorts who will look at the present and future tense impacts of specific technologies. So we'll be having conversations about design with Eve Bahar and the impacts of design on technological innovation and how technology is changing the apparatus of design. We'll have a conversation on synthetic biology with Jane Metcalf, the co-founder of Wired Magazine and founder of Neolife, Annalee Newitz, the editor of Ars Technica and author of Autonomous, and Emily Leproust, the CEO and co-founder of Twist Bioscience, about the impacts of DNA synthesis on our lives in terms of data science, in terms of medicine, in terms of the quantified self, in terms of all topics. We'll also be having Jeff Hancock, the founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab, and Mike Krieger, the co-founder of Instagram, talking about the impacts of social networks and the ubiquity of technology in our personal lives and what we can learn from culture about how we use social networks. And then we will have the artist Stephanie Dinkins, together with Tobias Reis, who is the director of the Berggruen Institute's Transformation of the Human program, and who we have to thank for today's program, bringing together these wonderful writers. And they will be talking about artificial intelligence and robotics and notions of the human and that fuzzy line that is becoming increasingly fuzzy as time goes on. So we want to thank Tobias and the Berggruen Institute for convening these writers here today with us and bringing these esteemed writers to the de Young for this conversation. I'm going to bring him up right now so that he can introduce our speakers today. Thank you so much.
I have been in the US now for almost 20 years, and this was the first time someone pronounced my family name properly. So hello, everybody. My name is Tobias Reis. And I'm a director at the Berggruen Institute. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon for a dialogue between Hao Jinfang and Stanley Robinson, moderated by journalist, writer, and current Berggruen Fellow, John Markoff. I hope this is merely the first of a whole series of collaborative events between can you hear me? Yeah. Between the Berggruen Institute and the De Young Museum. So my task is multiple. I got a little list of 4 or 5 things I have to talk about. They do not belong together, so bear with me as I walk through them. So the first job is to introduce our speakers. Jinfang entered the world of writing in 2002, so quite some time ago, when she won the first prize of the national competition of new concept writing in China. This prize gave her the opportunity to study at Beida, a very prestigious university, but she turned that offer down because she had already been accepted to study astrophysics at Tsinghua University. There she finished in the top 10 of her country, but instead of becoming an astrophysicist, she chose to do a PhD in developmental economics, which was not least due to her interest in social injustice or in economic inequalities. Hao got her PhD in 2013, but she has kept on writing science fiction novels throughout, or new concept stories. And astrophysics actually remains something like a machine for her to translate some of her ideas from developmental economics into the world of science fiction. So you enter, you pull the trigger, and on the other side come out science fiction ideas in terms of astrophysics. In 2016, she was the first Chinese to win the prestigious Hugo Award, given annually by the World Science Fiction Society, for her novelette, Folding Beijing. KSR, or Kim Stanley Robinson, probably needs no introduction. He's a local Northern Californian hero, but maybe the best and shortest way to introduce him is to say that Stan has written 20 novels, most famously, of course, his Mars trilogy, but received 21 prizes for his novels. Actually, Hao also has written a story or a novel on Mars, and maybe we hear how Mars is mediating the present from both of them. Next to Ursula Le Guin-Kroeber, Stan has been, as I see it, the most important science fiction writer of the last 40 years. What I find particularly fascinating about Stan's work is how an intense love for nature, our first conversation ever was about how he had just returned with John actually from a mountain in the High Sierra that they named Mount Thoreau because Thoreau had no name in the Sierra. So how his intense love for nature is not juxtaposed to, but goes along with an acute interest in science and political critique. Actually, Stan's most recent book is called Naming Mount Thoreau. I can hardly think of a better moderator than John Markoff, longtime writer for the New York Times, where he covered Silicon Valley in general and AI and the future it produces in particular. John, author of the best book on AI available, Machines of Loving Grace, is currently at Caspis at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. So my next job is to briefly talk about the Berggruen Institute, because of course you all came here to learn about the Berggruen Institute and what it actually is about. So the Berggruen Institute is a still novel institution based in Los Angeles with a center in Beijing and with what one could call an outpost in San Francisco. It is funded by Nicholas Berggruen and generously supported by Reid Hoffman. The Berggruen Institute has emerged from a whole series of recognitions and has a multitude of interests, but what they share is the observation that recent advances in science and engineering have produced both knowledge and technical possibilities that not only escape, but that trouble the philosophies and the political ideas and institutions that we have relied on. And thereby they leave us with big and unsolved philosophical questions about how to live, about what it means to be human, about what the place of the human in the world could be. In fact, it's the most curious feature of the present that the question concerning the human, so what is a human being, what does it mean to live a human life, is a question that was for a long time owned somewhat exclusively by the arts, appears today primarily in fields that are not concerned with the human, like engineering, AI research, microbiome research, or synthetic biology and CRISPR research. It's as if there is a displacement of the human into the realm of the non-human, and the consequence of this displacement is that the distinctions that have traditionally organized the world of ideas, so on the one hand you have the arts concerned with the human, on the other hand you have the sciences and technology concerned with nature and machines, can no longer be maintained. In fact, the whole distinction between the academic and the non-academic is partly unsuited to get at precisely the big questions of the present. So it's this overlap between philosophical questions, artistic explorations of the present, and science and engineering that interests the Berggruen Institute. And we believe that this overlap must be a collaborative effort between West and East, hence our center in Beijing and our close collaboration with Chinese philosophers, artists, and scientists, hence the presence of Hao Jinfang. The Berggruen Institute is an invitation for the creation of new ideas where our old ones have failed us. And the $1 million Berggruen Prize every year honors a major thinker who has helped us navigate the big philosophical questions of the contemporary world. When you came in, there was a little video clip up there. Now is the nomination period for the Berggruen Prize. It's called the Berggruen Prize in Philosophy, but you don't have to be a philosopher to receive it. Philosophy is here used in the broadest sense of the term. So please feel free to nominate people that you think have significantly contributed to the world of ideas in the recent past. Science fiction, to get back to where we started, is arguably a form of art as research that explores the big questions of the present from the perspective of the future. Like you, I'm now looking forward to a discussion between Jinfang and Stan, moderated by John, a discussion about the human and how this category seems to fail us, about the natural and the artificial at the moment in time in which this distinction seems to no longer hold, about Eastern and Western philosophies of the human, of nature, of technology, of the cosmos, and their different trajectories into the future, about the untamed futures that reverberate in thinking machines and networks, and about the form justice and love may take. Good that this is the last sentence. When we need to extend justice and love into the non-human. Please join me in welcoming Hao.
Thank you, Tobias. Just a little bit more framing, and then we'll get to it. I can't think of a more daunting topic than the future of humanity, and I was thinking about why now. And if you think about the millions of years of human history, just consider how extraordinary it is that it's just in the last 3 generations that we've had electronic machines. We've invented electronic machines that can augment the human mind. And it's just in hundreds of thousands of human generations of the species. And it's just this year or the last year that we've gotten the tools so that we can begin to edit the human genome, take out the bad bits, maybe add some good bits. It takes us straight to Stuart Brand, who in his opening sentence in the Whole Earth Catalog in 1968 noted, "We are as gods and we might as well get good at it." So it's no longer academic. So why science fiction writers? These days, Silicon Valley is absolutely littered with futurists and visionaries of every stripe, and I can attest as someone who's been there for a long time that they are as often wrong as they are right. Yesterday, there was a memorial at the Internet Archive for a man by the name of John Perry Barlow, who had been the songwriter for the Grateful Dead, and he also founded a Internet civil rights group, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And another science fiction writer, Cory Doctorow, made the distinction that science fiction is actually not about predicting the future. What he said was it's much more about inspiring us to think about the future that we're actually creating. And I thought that was a very thoughtful distinction. Yeah, I'm sorry. And so when Tobias proposed this conversation, it was interesting to me for a reason that might not be completely obvious. And that is, so I became a science fiction fan probably 1959. I read a book that I checked out from the Palo Alto Library called The Green Man from Mars. And I basically read nothing but science fiction then until my sophomore year of college, when I overdosed on the second reading of the Asimov trilogy. And then I couldn't face science fiction again until probably 20 years later, the cyberpunk era began. And I began to notice that life was imitating art. And at one point, and vice versa, at one point I had the pleasure of actually introducing a man by the name of Tsutomu Shimomura, who was a physicist, to a science fiction writer, Neal Stephenson. Tsutomu was best known, he was a physicist who had tracked down a computer outlaw by the name of Kevin Mitnick. And what I realized was that Tsutomu was an absolute dead ringer for a character in a Neal Stephenson novel called Snow Crash. The protagonist was a man called Hero Protagonist, and he was a cyber ninja, and Tsutomu was a cyber ninja in the real world. But what's most interesting and intriguing to me about Jinfang and Kim's work is something I actually studied, I stumbled across when I was researching a recent book on AI and robotics. I kept running into engineers who entered the field because they had read about artificial intelligence and science fiction. Both Rodney Brooks and Jerry Kaplan, who were 2 AI pioneers in the first generation of the field, second generation of the field, told me they decided to pursue artificial intelligence after seeing HAL in 2001 Space Odyssey. So it became clear to me that the way we fantasize about our future shapes the way we build our societies and vice versa. So with that in mind, could we start, can I ask you to individually tell us your path to science fiction, both as readers, if you read first, and writers? Jinfang, could you start? How did you come to science fiction?
When I was really young, almost about 9 years old, I I got the magazine with a lot of comics there, and one of the comics is about the future. A small, cute robot we call 小灵通 in China, and shows a little boy how the future is like, and there are a lot of imagination, all in comics, and it's a kind of educational comics to teach the little kids about science and technology. But that's my first love with science fiction stories. When I was in high school, I started to read some of those science fiction literatures. For example, Asimov, about his foundation and the robots, and also some classical authors like Arthur Clarke, and I also some Chinese authors. One of them is Liu Cixin. I was his fan when I was in high school, and so after I entered university as a astrophysics student, I got a lot of ideas in study. So when I was in my senior year in the university, I started to write some short stories and then a full-length novel. So actually, it's just a natural path from a young science fiction fan to become a science fiction writer.
And were your parents scientists? Were your parents scientists or technologists?
No, my parents are university teachers, but they are in accounting and auditing and these majors.
Did you know, were you unique at that point? How rare was it to follow your path?
To follow.
How unusual was it that you?
No, it's not like unusual at all. There are a lot of Chinese university students who attempted to write science fictions or other genres of stories. So I think a lot of people, they just started, but they did not continue. So they might write one or two pieces, and then they dropped to turn to some other interests. I just insist on writing and writing and writing until now. It's not very unusual.
Kim, how did you come to?
Well, I missed science fiction in my childhood and youth. I read mystery novels, and I didn't know science fiction existed, although it occurs to me that I did read A Wrinkle in Time, and I loved it dearly. But I guess I thought it was a freak of nature or something like a dream that I had, and I didn't know there was a genre there. So when I went to college, I ran into science fiction kind of by accident, and it was exactly the time of the new wave, and it was the time of the 60s. So science fiction for me was a really explosive and exciting manifestation of the 60s. So there's a kind of a California hippie Buddhist Gary Snyder, Jack Kerouac element in new wave science fiction, where instead of exploring outer space, it was a matter of inner space and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And this was just a time and place thing. It wasn't a matter of me choosing. Any paperback I picked up at that time would be about these things. And so I had the impression at that point, and I've had it ever since, that science fiction is simply California's realism, and maybe it's the world's realism. It's the best expression of the way the world feels right now.
And when did you pick up the pen? Did you begin writing in college, or?
Yes, at that same time I thought I was a poet, and I started by writing poetry that really, because of Gary Snyder, they were. It was a cover story that if you did like Chinese landscape poems in English, then you could excuse the fact that your poems didn't rhyme and didn't have much rhythm. They were, in effect, translated out of an unknown language. So I wrote a lot of poetry, and I still love it. And then when I discovered science fiction, I thought, well, let's try this. Because one thing I got to say that I think is very important is that science fiction is a kind of poetry. It's a set of symbols about the way life feels right now. So it's always allegorical or metaphorical. It's always not. It is about the future. That's one element, but it's also metaphorical for the situation now. That's the other element. And you have to do like 3D glasses at the movie theater. The two lenses make a third thing. And that's when science fiction gets its power, when it has both those elements working at once or becoming one thing.
From that period when you entered the field as a reader, are there canonical examples of that inner science fiction that come to mind
Sure. J.G. Ballard in England, The Crystal World, and all of Ballard's work. Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness. This was the great gender mind-boggler, and the same with Joanna Russ, The Female Man. Samuel Delaney's Dahlgren, which is a kind of a New York novel, but it's also the 60s and 70s. So the new wave is it's a moment in science fiction that I think was a high point.
Yeah. So if we can ignore the rest of America for a moment and look just at California and compare it to China. In science fiction, transportation is often something that's explored. Flying cars are this trope that's not quite here yet, but there's a lot of discussion of flying cars. I was, though, thinking about your thoughts about China and California. My understanding is that China now has more than 12,000 miles of high-speed rail. And I believe we're struggling in California to put down our first mile successfully. And do you have thoughts about that, what that says about the two societies at this juncture?
Actually, I knew that there used to be a lot of railway in the United States, but people just abandoned it. So it's not only about technology; it's about the customer's choice of technology. Especially in our society, technology is never just a scientific thing of what is possible in science. It's about the market's choice of what should be made in the future. So here, I think that the U.S. people, especially the Californian people, just choose the cars. So now I don't think that perhaps you should see the trains, the high-speed trains, as a symbol that everybody should have. In Europe, people still use a lot of trains and subways as the traffic method, but here in the United States, if you don't have a car, you cannot go anywhere. So I think it's a kind of a social and economic thing to decide what kind of technology is the most popular one in one particular country.
Kim, do you have thoughts about the future of transportation and what it says about our societies?
It's interesting to follow up on Jinfang here. The choice in China, they have an enormous surplus, $2 trillion of U.S. Treasury bond, and have been the manufacturing nation of the world for 30 years. And capital is not capital unless it gets reinvested. And also, there's 1.5 billion people to be employed. And so you get high-speed rail and all the rest of the infrastructure as a way to employ people and spend a capital surplus and reinvest it. So there might be better things to spend the money on, but then that's a social choice. You have to figure it out. A lot of governments will go to the simplest thing.
But yeah, I do think that maybe future transportation can, to some extent, change people's life. For example, we try to discuss what would the impact of Hyperloop if it comes true. But I'm not sure the transportation can really change the mobility of the society, and the mobility of the society change people's mind, change people's culture and norms a lot. Still, I think that transportation is only one aspect of the society, and the people's lifestyle will decide what kind of transportation they like.
There's been skepticism about the Hyperloop in this country, and one of the more interesting critiques that I've seen suggested that while it might not be appropriate for moving people efficiently, it might be tremendously efficient for moving freight, and that it actually made more sense for the Chinese Silk Road that you're talking about, or the One Belt, One Road strategy, the new Silk Road. Is there a discussion in China of using these new methods of transportation to move freight instead of people?
In China, the government are always try to pursue some new higher speed, new technology to transport people. But there aren't many scientific or technological discussion about this, but it's more especially the One Road, One Belt initiative. It's more kind of economic thing, just like Mr. Robinson suggested. It's a way of just transfer the excess capital to somewhere else.
Kim, have you thought about the Hyperloop as either as what has Elon done as a sort of, I don't want to say propaganda, but as a...
Well, no, it's a grant proposal. It's a fundraising bid. It's science fiction. There is a lot of science fiction out there now that is presented as a proposal or as an inevitable future. And these are all science fiction stories that need to be pressed as science fiction stories. And the one thing you got to say is that there's almost no science fiction stories come true. So these are fundraising appeals. The Hyperloop, and also they slide to the side of the real problem, which is the carbon problem. And so the whole thing would have to be analyzed in terms of, does it help us to burn less carbon into the atmosphere? Might it draw down carbon? And otherwise, who cares if we go faster on the surface of the Earth? It's irrelevant. We already go as fast as we need to. We even have flying cars. This old chestnut about science fiction predicting flying cars, they're called Lear jets, okay? And they are a flying car. But it turns out that they cost $2 or $3 million, and you can only, you could run a Learjet down the freeway if you wanted to, but it's a stupid idea to begin with. So science fiction is filled with stupid ideas, and so all of science fiction ideas, including fundraising appeals, have to be pressed hard with the reality principle. So I say the Hyperloop is basically irrelevant.
Well, let me push on the flying car notion. Now. The Learjet point is well taken, but there are probably a dozen startups in and around Silicon Valley in America that are working on sort of machines that take off and can move maybe a half a dozen passengers in an intra-urban situation that are battery powered. They seem like they're almost real. Do the Chinese have a fascination with flying cars as well? Where are the Chinese with the idea of...
No, not the flying cars, because I think Chinese people, they are still in a phase of fascinating about the high-speed railways and other things, and the rockets and those things, not the flying cars at this moment. But to me, I think that if the speed is high enough, no, I mean that the speed only matters a lot if only somebody, some privileged people who can enjoy that, and the other people, the else of the society cannot, and that might be a big thing for the society. And then some people can live in a more efficient way and do a lot of things, but the other people have to wait for a long time to go to somewhere, and then that may have a social impact. But if just everybody's speed raise to another level, it just creates a more busy society, but I don't think our lives can be changed or to a more comfortable way.
Kim?
Yeah, Ernest Kallenbach used to divide the world into the people who could afford cars and jets, so that would be first space, and the people who could only afford trains and bicycles, that would be second space, and the people who are still on foot, of whom there are many in this world. So these are like class divisions that are technologically arranged. Now, after the crash of 2008, the quantitative easing comes to about $15 billion, and it was given only to the banks and to the rich. So we're in a situation where effectively there's too much money for to make rational investments. The rich are too rich, so you get IPOs, and this is a Silicon Valley thing. Oh my gosh, I can make you a helicopter. You can dodge the traffic jams that are everywhere in California, and somebody say, well, yeah, we'll make $25 million in a day by putting out an IPO for a single-person helicopter. Call it a drone, and indeed, they will make that much. So these are science fiction stories that are also scams. They're out there trying to troll for the excess money that's floating around on the top of our society.
Yes, actually, the only way that you can avoid a traffic jam is that you are the only persons who can enjoy a privilege, the traffic ways. If only maybe 100 people can drive a car in San Francisco, there will be no traffic jam at all, and these people can drive really fast. So now, if you have a privileged helicopter, you can sure go to somewhere without any difficulty. But if the helicopter is very cheap as a car, and everybody has a helicopter, there will be even much more severe traffic jam in the sky.
Second order effects.
Yeah.
You mentioned first space and second space, Kim. Were you referring to folding Beijing? Because maybe what was your reaction? Maybe describe a little bit what you thought. A couple of Jinfang's pieces have been translated, and folding Beijing is one of them.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about it. These are beautiful stories. There are 3 of them that can be found online at all times, and the most famous one by far by Jinfang is called Folding Beijing. And this is a great example of science fiction as metaphor for the way things are right now. So the people who live in first space, about 5 million of them, they have a day in Beijing. And then when they go to sleep, they take a drug that keeps them asleep for the next day. And during that day, Beijing flips over. Second space is split between the second space people and the third space people, 20 million and then 50 million people who are keeping the city going. So it's sort of like the rich, the middle class, and the working class. But it's also, I was thinking about it driving down here in a traffic jam, that it's also somewhat reminiscent of the old first world, second world, third world split into these 3 basic classes of humanity right now: the very privileged, the working middle class, the precariat, and then the immiserated, or the people who are still poor. So this the story won the Hugo Award for Best Novel of the Year. It's a beautiful piece of work that you can call prose poetry, a symbol for the way things are now. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, actually, it's a story. If you read the story, you will think it's very realistic in description. However, I just described a future society with robots replaced a lot of low skill workers. So in that city with 80 million people, 50 million of them are low-skilled, low-income workers who were replaced by automation and robot. So these people cannot find the proper high-paid jobs, and the government just try to constrain them into the third space. They only got 8 hours in every 48 hours. So when they come out, they can only come out during night. It's 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in every 48 hours. So I try to explore the possibility that some of those population might get into that kind of virtuous cycle that they are low paid, low education, and their next generation cannot be well educated, and future technological oriented society, this kind of population might never get into the higher upper level of the society, and the only thing the government can do is to give them some lowest insurance for them to survive and to limit them in the certain space. And yes, it's metaphor. It's a metaphor. I just want to express the kind of feeling that I got in the big cities is that some people just cannot see the other people. They think their family and their life circle and their friends is the whole world, but actually there are a lot of people living completely different with with them in the same physical space. So I just want to express this kind of a segregation in a story.
Let's talk a little bit more about automation, since that's a big issue in America. I was wrapped up in this sort of 2010, 2011. I began to report on the first technologies that were displacing white-collar workers for the first time, not blue-collar workers, but lawyers and doctors. And I was part of that crowd that had their hair on fire saying that there would be no jobs at all because of the rate of change. And I made this argument to an economist, Danny Kahneman, over a dinner a couple of years ago. And I was sort of arguing that manufacturing technologies would come to China, and it would lead to social disruption because of the displacement of workers. And he cut me off and he said, "You don't get it." He said, "In China, they'll be lucky if the robots come just in time." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he walked me through the demographic situation that's come out of the one-child policy in China. And it really reframed my view of the automation question entirely. And I now say that I believe demography trumps technology, if you will. What does it look, I mean, so China is aging much more quickly than the United States. What does it look like to be in an aging society in terms of those questions?
Yes, people argue that China will lack of enough labor in a few years because of the one-child policy. And 3 or 4 years ago, we really watched that a lot of factories in the eastern coast areas cannot find enough workers. They raise the salary to a high point, but still not enough workers. So now those factories are very happy to replace workers by automation workshops. So yeah, actually I think that the problem of unemployment replacement by automation in China might not be that severe because China is still in a phase in the necessity of a lot of young laborers. However, the problem is just like I've mentioned, a lot of people, they are still very low educated and low skilled. Before this kind of wave of technological development, the only thing they can do is some repeatable manufacturing works or some repeatable service works, such as you tell people where to go in an airport. However, now these kind of positions are replaced quickly by automation and robots in China. So I think as time goes on, a lot of these kind of low skill positions are more and more scarce. Then people still have the problem of they have to transfer them into the high value added, high skill positions, and those positions there's a great need of people. But the problem is the education and the trainings might not be enough for the people to make this transfer.
Kim, have you looked at automation at all in your?
I have, and I think it's another science fiction story gone wrong. There's a tendency to do straight line extrapolation in our predictions of the future. It's a common mistake because, in fact, straight line extrapolation never works in nature. There's always a depletion of resources and essentially the logistical curve, a big S curve, is the way things tend to move. And then you can't predict when the flattening comes. So in essence, the future is fundamentally unpredictable. But people want a notion, and so straight line extrapolation takes the place of really thinking about it. Automation is great when you're in a factory doing jobs that can be automated, but humans have to install them. And there's many and many a job that robots could never do. They can't be a policeman, they can't be a judge, they can't bring up the littlest kids, they can't take care of the old and the dying, they can't do landscape restoration, they can't do construction work, they can't do plumbing. The things that automation cannot do are much more numerous than the things that automation can do, which has to do with the inside of factories building things. And even there, humans are like the the lubricant that keeps things moving. Whenever things get stuck, it's not another robot that fixes it. It's a human that comes in there and fixes it. So this is another false problem that gets thrown out by sloppy science fiction thinking, where you imagine a future will be like things are trending right now without any constraints at the end game. And it happens all the time, but there are more jobs than there are people to do them everywhere.
Yeah, I do agree that there are more jobs that are implacable because people are always oversees the capability of AIs and try to just underpin the capability of humans. Actually, in a lot of jobs, it's not standardized. So with a formula. For example, lawyers, actually lawyers are not those people who just memorize all those cases and who just follow the lines to do things. Lawyers can do a lot of case-by-case works, and it involves interaction with people and to think in your shoes, to think what is the best solution for your case in your standpoint. So these are all very personalized and cannot be standardized to give it to an AI. So I think that although a lot of routine works easily be replaced, but a lot of people involve human interactions are not. So, but these kind of jobs need better training of people. If we can only educate people that can only do the routine works, and then they cannot do these kind of works as well.
So that leads me in two directions. The first one, there's a story of yours that has not been translated, that's about an AI, I guess, that becomes an operating system, that is an operating system for a household, and the conversation that AI has with a child. And to me, it sounded very evocative of an American movie called Her, which a human falls in love with an operating system. But I wanted to ask you about this in the context of our two societies. Microsoft in America had a very terrible experience a couple of years ago. They created a companion system, a chatbot called Tay. And Tay was designed in such a way that it immediately became homophobic and racist and sexist, and it was just this terrible expression. But what was not widely known is earlier on, Microsoft did a similar experiment in China with a program called Xiaoice on Weibo. And Xiaoice became very popular. It was different than Siri and Alexa and Google Home in that it was not designed to just simply answer a command. It was designed to have a long conversation. And apparently, it developed a large, young Chinese audience of millions of people. They would have up to 60 interactions with this system a day. 25% said typed, "I love you" to it. 50% typed, thank you. And so it really made me think about, in America, everything turns into pornography as soon as it falls to the level of the street. But can you foresee a role for AIs where they will be companions for the elderly or for the young?
At least at this moment, according to all the existing algorithm, I can't see this kind of perspective. But if you say some far future with some magic algorithm happen in the far future, I cannot tell. But at this point, all the responses of the AIs are still based on the searching and matching strategy, which means that even if they don't understand what's your question, they can just compare that question with the huge database and compare that question to search for best matched result. So if you talk with these kind of AIs, you will always get some ambiguous answer. Oh, your question is interesting. Oh, how smart of you. Oh, right, be relaxed. Oh, it's okay. Sleep, and tomorrow is another day. Things like this. But if you care about whether they really understand your thoughts, understand your situation, you find they don't understand at all. And if you ask them about those ambiguous questions, do you have a dream? Which would you think is better, a professional job or a family? These kind of opinions, they don't have any opinions at all. So if you would like to have any deeper interactions with them, you will definitely be disappointed. But I don't doubt that if there's a cute little robot, they can be a companion with the kids, because my kids can be a friend with my mobile phone right at this moment. So it's just like a toy. A toy can be a companion, so that's no problem.
And in your story, where did you go with your story on the AI and the interaction with the child?
Actually, in my story, it's just the opposite. The AI system is really powerful. It can calculate everything in the world, but it just don't have a purpose of itself. So the programmer asked the super AI to learn from a child. See how the little kids explore the world, how he is curious about the outside, how he has the spirit of exploration. And then actually the super AI learned from a little 4-year-old kid.
So I wanted to ask Kim, your sense of sort of the rise of Chinese science fiction now. I kind of have a very naive view. I mean, China is becoming a technological society, and it seems like science fiction goes hand in glove. Is there a sort of a deeper sense of what's going on there compared to America?
Well, I think everywhere science fiction appears when a nation or a culture is reached its industrial level and has a sense of its future or is interested in its future. So there's no science fiction until no real science fiction until the revolutions of the 18th century, at which point the idea of the future pops in and then you want to write about it. But you see science fiction in the industrial West, so United States and Europe, Western Europe. And then a good counterexample is in Latin America. What you get is magical realism, because in Latin America, the feeling of history is that bizarre things are happening inexplicably to us, and science is going on somewhere else and being imposed on us in an imperial way. So magical realism was native to Latin America, and at the same time science fiction was going on in North America and Europe. And if you see someone write a magical realist novel set in New York, it's actually quite a bad novel. And if you see science fiction popping up, or if you see it coming out of India, like Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children, it's very fitting, because India has more of a resonance with Latin America than it did with the industrial West. So, but now what you're seeing is science fiction coming out of China. And because China has had an idea of its future ever since the Great Revolutions 100 years ago, there has always been a steady stream of Chinese science fiction. But now with the last 30 years of technological innovation and the rise of China to an immense world power, and maybe the next world hegemonic power, the science fiction has also grown. So we have, I think Liu Cixin is really the star. He's sort of the Asimov. I say to people, he's as if you can imagine that Arthur C. Clarke had been written by Philip K. Dick, you get what Liu Cixin is doing. It's peculiar, it's surrealistic, it's metaphorical, it's really inventive, and it's also his most famous novel, which also won the Hugo Award, first time that the novel had been won by a translated work, the Novel Award. Well, it starts in the Cultural Revolution, and so this also was very exciting, that the Cultural Revolution is seen as a place of disaster and chaos and ferment, and out of it they go on to a time where we're interacting with aliens. Well, it begs to be decoded as a kind of an allegory, and it's also a very famous Liu Cixin story is a working Chinese man doing construction work. His final construction work job is out in the stars and doing interstellar work, and it's just a natural evolution of one guy doing the best thing he can for himself at each stage of the way. So that's obviously an allegory of what could happen to China now.
Yeah, actually, I think that science fiction, I do agree with the sentence you've quoted. Science fiction is not about to accurately predict the future, and it's also not only about technology. To me, science fiction is a mental experiment of what will happen in this situation, what will happen in that situation. So at this moment in China, you know, everything is fast changing, and if there are a lot of opportunities for you to just imagine a situation, to do this kind of mental experiment. And Liu Cixin first write a lot of these kind of very realistic science fiction stories. One famous one is about a teacher in the poor countryside who tried to teach those poor children in the middle school to remember the Newton's law. And it's nonsense for them to remember Newton's law, because they will never utilize that kind of knowledge in their future. And they still live in the poor village. However, at this moment, the aliens come. They come to try to find out whether there's a civilization on the Earth. The method they use is randomly choose somebody to see whether they understand the basic physics. And they choose those kids, and those kids understand Newton's law. And then they found that, oh, this is a civilized planet. We don't destroy it. Yeah, so this kind of yeah, that's very funny, but it's reflect some kind of reality in China, that you have to cultivate people in a really uncultivated culture, and a lot of people just don't realize the importance of science, of other things. So I think that in China, especially at this moment, science fiction provides you a lot of opportunities to do those anti-reality mental experiment, and that's very interesting for the Chinese society at this moment. And I also think that science fiction provides us opportunity to reflect ourselves. The reason I like the topic of artificial intelligence is not I'm excited by the technological development, is that through the study of AIs, we can get a better view of our humans. When we ask why they cannot think like us, then we have to question how we think, how we got these ideas, how we think, and then we found, oh, our brain is still so mysterious. We have so many miracles happening in our brain, and then we get better knowledge of ourselves, and also a lot of science fiction like this.
Interesting. That's one conception of an AI as kind of an independent thinker. The one that I worry more about, which is a popular idea in American science fiction, is the Star Trek Borg. Resistance is futile, we will assimilate you. And I worry about it because I see things in American society that suggest that the individual humans may be subsumed in this soup of algorithms that we're building. One of the things that's quite striking and popular in the robotics field right now is the notion of cloud robotics, which is very Borg-like to me, and that is that, one robot, when they're all connected, if one robot learns something, all the robots potentially know that, which is very different than the way humans learn. And so, am I wrong to fear being subsumed by this system that we're designing?
I think it's another science fiction story that's out there that's too extreme. We live in a soup of science fiction stories, and distinctions need to be made. This one in particular, one thing about AI is it doesn't have agency, and we don't know how to program agency. In other words, the intention, the desire to do something, will. These are human elements of human character that AIs so far don't have, and you maybe have to get to some not only faster computers like quantum computers, but also way more complex programming to get to that level of intentionality and will. So that essentially with AI, you go over and you pull the plug and the power's gone, and the AI doesn't resist that because it has no intention one way or another, even about its own survival. So the whole AI thing I think the metaphor involved, when people talk about fearing AI, what does AI stand for there? It stands for science. What we mean when we talk about, oh, I fear AI, is we mean there's a force out there. It's transhuman. It's smarter than humans. It controls everything. We are not in control of it. It controls us. It all translates perfectly to our feelings about science, that we're somehow out of control of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, and that that somehow history, if you want to worry about the singularity, the moment in which the computers take off into the universe and leave us behind, that it already happened, like at the 2008 crash or sometime like that. We're post-singularity, we're out of control. And so this is, in other words, a science fiction story, a metaphor that we're telling ourselves to try to comprehend why things feel the way they do right now. The end of effective politics, the crisis of representation. In other words, none of us feel represented properly by our governments. These things get transferred into science fiction stories that we tell ourselves, and the fears get, it's very much a depth psychology or a kind of Freudian thing. There's a transposition of the fear onto something else that you might be able to pull the plug. So this is what I think AI is doing.
Actually, I think that if the AIs in the future, the largest probability is to become a cloud AI, a network AI, super AI. However, I don't think that we should scare of that kind of scenario. Actually, I think it's less scary than a robot AI, because if it's just a single robot AI with a certain body and then with a lot of interactions and a lot of mind works, it might get some sense of identity or self-protectionism or aggressive with, because it really has that limit of itself. But what does a self mean if it's on the cloud and it's a network? It doesn't afraid of you just plug you just take off the battery or you just take in the plug, because it always has a lot of copies of the mind, and it always has electricity somewhere. So if you just turn off your computer, you never turn off the whole internet. So it won't afraid of you just taking off the electricity. And then on this sense, if it just don't have a self, don't have a kind of a limitation of the existence, then I don't think it will generate any kind of self-identity, self-consciousness, or any kind of aggression, emotion to people. And I don't think we should afraid of this kind of AI. For example, I think that internet now, it is already quite intelligent. You can ask everything to the internet. You can Google a question and the internet will tell you. It is already very intelligent, but we are not afraid of internet because it's not a figure with this kind of intentions. I do agree with you. The intention, where does those intentions come from, is still a mystery. The willingness, the hatred, the love, these kind of thing. So if it doesn't have this kind of self-consciousness, then it won't do anything against people. It just won't happen.
You've both written about colonizing Mars. Is the destiny of our species off this planet and perhaps on Mars? We have in America, a number of very wealthy individuals. Elon Musk has famously said that he wants to die on Mars, just not on impact. Where are you each on?
I'm somewhat responsible, I guess, for the Mars. The Mars fascination. And I actually love the planet, but I think humanity is earthbound, that we co-evolved with this planet, and we have no idea if we can live off Earth for any length of time beyond a year or two without devastating health effects. So Mars works as a kind of a mirror or a modeling exercise. Things are smaller, simpler, and if you have to take care of a planet's biosphere, and that becomes a technical problem, a management problem that you have to do creatively, well, we're there with Earth. And even in that book, I talked about terraforming Earth, but now we call it geoengineering because the phrase terraforming Earth sounds like a sick joke. And in a way, geoengineering scares all of us to think about the idea that we could mess with this biosphere. But we may have to. So I would say Mars is just like Antarctica. And we're fascinated with it because we haven't been there yet. But we were fascinated with the moon till we got to the moon, and we were fascinated with the North Pole and South Pole till we got to the poles. Same with the top of Everest. So part of the fascination is the hardest place that we could get to that we haven't got to yet, that's interesting. When we get there, it'll become like Antarctica. Right now there's people at the South Pole, and winter's coming on, and McMurdo too. Nobody cares, and it'll be that way with Mars also. We'll have little scientific stations there for centuries. Because terraforming Mars, although it might be a great project, is a project for thousands of years from now. But in the meantime, it's super interesting, it's helpful, but it isn't the solution, and it isn't a place to go really, you should just go to Monument Valley and die there. You know, look exactly the same and pretend you're on Mars.
So are there people like Musk and others in China, wealthy individuals who want to?
Yes, there's another quite famous Chinese businessman who would copy what Musk did here and try to give a lot of money for those Mars missions in the future. But I agree with Mr. Robinson on the future of people migrate to Mars. Actually, I've read the novel Red Mars before I wrote my Mars story, and I thought it's like a textbook of how to try to build a kingdom on Mars. So I think it's still very scientific, very possible of all those procedures. And in my story, I wrote the kingdom on Mars is not about a pure scientific reason. Which means I think that we need to live on Mars. It's also a kind of mental experiment because I just created two societies with different social mechanisms and social law systems and social economic systems. And Mars got independence from the Earth, and after 40 years of separation, they are in a quite intense position, just like a Cold War, and both societies feels uncomfortable with the other one and thinks the other one is the evil one. And so I just would like to compare a different kind of a society with a different kind of social mechanisms as the Earth. That's the reason I described a society on Mars. I just need to choose some planet for this, and Mars is the nearest one. But for the scientific reason itself, when I was an astrophysics student, I used to dream of becoming an astronaut just eagerly. But I asked a scientist, why don't you just do a lot of experiments in the space? Then you can send a lot of scientists into the space. And he said that it's much more cheaper if we just send the equipment and we do the science on Earth. It's just equivalent if you can just control the equipment in space. And then you do not need to go there because he said that if you send a person up, the price is calculated by the gram. So you need a whole bunch of dollars for 1 gram of the material. So it will be much, much more expensive for us to send people to the Mars than for us to make the Earth as a better place to live. So if we have $10, we can send 1 person to Mars, but we can maybe save 100 person on Earth to make them better environment. So if you consider this thing economically, then it will never happen. If we do have that kind of budget and technology, we can then do Earth's project to make Earth a better place to live. So it will. it will not pass any budget debate in any countries at this moment. So I think that realistically, I don't think Mars will be the humans' next destination, but it's still a fascinating place for story writing. And especially if we need a mirror to just reflect our own world, our own society.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to the audience in a second, so you think of questions if you have some. But I wanted to ask you just one more area. You've both explored inequality, too, and you're a professional economist, and it comes up as a theme for you. There seems to be growing evidence that this era of computerization actually has exacerbated inequality, and perhaps is a driving force. Maybe not poverty. No, you disagree. I mean, so as science fiction writers, how do you explore inequality?
Well, no, computers are a tool. We use the tools, and we all love our computers, and they're tremendous tools. They facilitate. So inequality is capitalism. It's a set of rules where the work that everybody does, the surplus value of it gets vacuumed up to the 1%, we called them a few years ago. And that's an inevitable, that's the legal result. People don't have to be criminal, they don't have to be evil, they don't have to cheat. The automatic result of the rules that we live under create inequality. So the rules need to change because people's lives are being wrecked, but also the biosphere is being wrecked because the environment gets tossed out as an externality and is merely a source of profit. And you could say there are no real profits. There's only profits created by destroying people's lives and destroying the future biosphere. So that's the problem. Computers, I think, man, bring them on, more AI, because if you think of AI and computers as being science, and science is a force for good and not something to fear. It's like Jinfang was describing up there in the cloud. It's exactly science itself. No reason to fear science. It doesn't have intention. We aim it. So what we need to fear is the economic system that we've agreed to live by.
Yeah, I do agree with this, and I just want to add one point is the cognitive gap. I think the cognitive gap is enlarging now because when I observe the Chinese society, I found out there are still a lot of students, kids in the poor villages who never has any knowledge on those techniques, but for those kids here in the Silicon Valley, they can program in their own website at the age of 8 or 9, and they can start up their own company at age of 16, 17. Then the cognitive gap might even get worse and get enlarged for the next generation, because if the first generation is quite intelligent in all these new technological area, and then he or she knows how to select the learning materials for its kids, how to do really advanced teaching method for their kids, and their kids will catch up with the technological development on the frontier. But for those parents who lack of these kind of knowledge, he or she cannot just do the selection, and the kids might even more difficult to catch up with all these things. For computer, the computer itself is not a tool to help you to be more intelligent. It's just a thing there, and you can watch all kinds of advertisement on the computer all day, and you just you can become a computer potato, just eating chips every day without getting any useful information from it. So I think this cognitive gap it's something we should concern as an educator for the next generation. If we hope there's some equality for the next generation, we need to help the kids at least to catch up with the technological things.
Thank you for that. Let me see if I can see people in the audience. Oh, the lights will come on. Good, I can. Are there folks that have questions?
Thank you so much for hosting this and making it free and accessible for everyone here to be part of. I really appreciate it, and it's been fascinating. My question on the topic of economics is in regard to something that's a buzzword right now, obviously cryptocurrency and blockchain. I'm curious, as futurists and economists and people who think deeply about these things, what are your opinions on the future of currency as far as crypto is concerned, or do you have any opinions on that?
Well, I've read that a quarter of 1% of all of the energy that humanity creates is being used to mine bitcoins. And bitcoins don't function as a medium of exchange. They're a speculative bubble. It's exactly like the gold rush in California in the 1850s. Can you get money for nothing? So Bitcoin is a speculative bubble. Now, blockchain is an interesting mechanism or algorithm set that might be used for more interesting things. And so I think cryptocurrency is another matter of this extra sploosh of money. There's more money than there are good investment opportunities, and so why not throw some money that way, see if something comes of it that would make more money later. And I think also, what if the medium of exchange, the Bitcoin equivalent, what if it was some kind of carbon coin where having drawn down a pound of carbon out of the atmosphere and then sheathing it in plastic, that's my dollar equivalent, and fungible with other currencies or tradable with other currencies, so that you, instead of burning carbon into the atmosphere to make money that doesn't even work as money, I hate this Bitcoin fad. What if it was actually drawing carbon out of the atmosphere in order to create a medium of exchange that is actually good for something?
To me, I think blockchain makes some sense because of the algorithm, the scattering of data, the ways people just record things transparently. All these things make sense to me because I think that might help people to do a lot of perhaps managerial works in the future. But Bitcoin is another thing. Bitcoin is not equivalent to blockchain. Bitcoin, if it would like to serve as money, a kind of currency, then it becomes an economic or a social thing. It's different. Actually, the value of money is now the value of a currency really based on people's trust of it. In our room now, if we just say that cough is a currency, if you cough 3 times, it means $3, and we all agree with it, then it is our currency in our room, and we can use our cough to exchange things. Unless all the other people agree with this rule and everybody has faith into it, then it's a valid currency. We can use cough as our currency and we can make money from nowhere. But the problem is that we cannot maintain these kind of trust normally in a society, and especially when the society is getting larger and larger. At a point of time, if people just don't believe into it, said, oh, cough is not a currency, and then the currency just crash and it becomes useless. And it happens in some countries as well, this kind of mistrust of a currency. So that's why we always trust some kind of government, although we normally hate a government, but if it's a stable government, then people think, okay, it's more trustworthy or to back up for this this currency. At least there's some law to protect it. So that's why all the main currencies in the world has the backup of government. So if Bitcoin is just something you think is valuable and all the people in the community think it's valuable, it cannot guarantee its future, because as this community getting larger and larger, the members are not those technological geeks at the first place. I knew the atmosphere in the community was really, 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 really good, because everybody there was programmers in this new community. They are excited. They are only technological geeks. But now there are a lot of other people, other investors who just want to make money out of nothing. And then it's, as the society getting larger and larger, if the trust just break down, then the currency will be worthless. And also about the problem of democracy, you know that on blockchain it has the mechanism of vote. I asked one guy from the blockchain community, what if there's big split, big conflict of the vote result? He said normally just one community just split into two. And just like one city just split into two cities, and they have their own autonomy. And this kind of direct democracy has in history proved not that efficient in governance of a large community. So I'm not sure about the vote mechanism on Bitcoin, on the blockchain system as well. So we'll see.
I'm curious if the current administration in power, if that stimulates your dystopian or your utopian creative juices.
Well, naturally, my utopian juices. That seems to me to be the best response. I think we'll get back in the Paris Accord. I think there'll be an international attempt to cut our carbon burn, and good things will follow from that. So that's a story that needs to be told over and over again. I think it's if the current administration is functioning like a soap opera on TV and wants your attention, wants ratings, then one thing that's important to do is to say this show is too stupid to watch, and not get caught up emotionally because there's too much angst, there's too many reasons to be angry. It can wreck the good things going on, and it's going to pass sooner or later, and we'll be doing better things. So we've had low points in American history before, and some of them are only like 14 years ago. And so it's not grotesquely, it's grotesque, but it isn't hugely different from earlier bad moments that we can all remember quite well. And so I think it's important to focus on the positive stories that can be told that are happening under the soap opera.
I myself, on the technological side, I'm very optimistic and quite utopian, because I think that the human talent, intelligence, and technology can really solve a lot of problems. One is, you know, the Marsa's trap. The Marsa's predict that human population goes like this, and our technological development goes like this, so there will be too many people on the Earth, and the Earth cannot afford us. But after his prediction, the population of the Earth has increased a lot of folds after that, but we still can afford us, and even in a better, more comfortable way, with cheaper things and almost excess energy. So it means that the development of technology is still a faster pace, the growth of population. On this sense, I believe in technology. But on the other sense, in the society, I do not believe in human nature and society to really form a utopian. So on this sense, I'm a dystopian. The reason for this is that when we try to think of a perfect society, we think it's always peaceful, always prosperous, with not that much inequality and a lot of good aspects of it. But the problem is that the main obstacle for this utopian society lies in our heart, lies in our human nature. It's not actually the main obstacle for equality is that a lot of people, they really don't desire equality. They desire inequality, and they just hope they are the rich. So they don't hate for inequality. They just hate that why I am not the richest one. So even if you put everybody in an equal society, and then there's still a lot of people who are unsatisfied and who will find methods to become the rich, to break this equality. And also for the peace state, there are just a lot of people who just would like to conquer the others, who hope they are the winners. So I think that the human nature lies in ourselves. Just don't support a utopian description of the future society. So I sometimes is quite pessimistic that a lot of effort we are doing now is doomed to be useless because the world is continuously, periodically get into disasters, no matter how many lessons we've got from the history. But on the other side, I still think that as a civilized person, there are still a lot of things we should do, try to make the world a better place. Yeah.
Hi there.
Question.
I'm going to insert a word into the conversation that I haven't heard tonight, and that's the topic of race. I'm curious what your guys' relationship is to race in the context of science fiction, whether it's talking about racism or talking about the relationship between technology and people understanding race. I'm also curious as to any current writers today that you guys know about that you're really interested in that are talking about race and science fiction. Thank you.
Well, I'm proud of the science fiction community. I am, you know, as you can see, I am an older white American male, so amongst the most privileged people in human history. But my community taught me early on, one of my first teachers, Samuel R. Delaney, and one of my colleagues, Octavia Butler, science fiction community was pretty white in those years, but it was also way more open to difference and disability difference, gender difference, and race than its context. And it helped that it was the 60s and 70s, and things were blowing up on that front as on so many others. So now we have Nnedi Okorafor or N.K. Jemisin, Ken Liu. We have a community that is supported across the world, and so science fiction has always been, as a community, a utopian force, trying to make a better world ahead of the fact. And I'm proud of it as my kind of distributed hometown. And it's definitely a happening issue in science fiction right now. Well, I select the students for the Clarity Science Fiction Writers Workshop. I run the committee that makes the selections, and so I organize and gather that committee. And so I'm seeing it happening at the level of the stories and of the 200 applicants that come in every year to become science fiction writers. There's way more talented women than men right now. That's just an artifact of the, I mean, that's something that you see in the stories. Can't explain it, but it's true. And then there's a breadth of diversity, and the Octavia Butler Award, which goes to a person of color going to Clarion. There's always 5 or 6 candidates that we have to send the stories off to the Carl Brandon Society for them to make the choice. And because of the blow up in the science fiction community over the Hugo Award being hijacked for a couple of years by the Sad Puppies, who were a kind of reactionary group, a kind of racist group. And it turned out that the nomination rules could be hijacked, and they were. And the reaction against that has been vigorous. It sort of maybe models what will happen in the reaction against Trump and Trumpism in the next couple of years. the Hugo Awards were taken back, and the science fiction community was rattled and rallied, and I think I'm proud of it.
Chinese people are not that sensitive now to this topic because now in China we don't have many races. We are all Chinese people, although there are some minority groups, but some conflicts, but not as a big issue as here in the United States. And but as a science fiction writer, because we are always facing the future, so we always kind to write the story in which all people just mix together to form a new Earth species, and you cannot tell from the appearance or the names who they come from. So in my story, I sometimes make up some new names from which you cannot tell whether it's a Chinese or a Western one, or from German, or from Germany, or from the other countries. So I just make up some new mixed names to reflect the mixture of all different people in the future. So I myself do hope that in the future there will be a more mixation of races and cultures. And also from the past experience of China in the history, I think that culture is still an important thing, because it's the common culture decided whether two races will mix up together or not, or separate with each other. In China, there used to be hundreds of different races in the whole big country, and each time China, the original China, has been invaded by the minority races for several times, tens of times, and each time when a minority group come into China for several decades or 100 years, they become Chinese people because they mix bloodly with the original Chinese people, and also they adopted the original Chinese culture, the Confucius culture and other culture. And so after this thousands of years, you cannot tell which race do they originally from, but there are hundreds of races used to come to China. But finally, everybody mixed together to form a big China population. And I'm not sure whether that will happen, because sometimes the wall that just prevent people from mixed up together is the culture. Culturally, people don't want to mix together, and then the separation of race is just moving forward, and a lot of conflict. I'm not sure whether there's a solution to this or not.
So I'm told that we're out of time. I just wanted to conclude with one thought from Alan Kay, who was a computer scientist, who said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And so please join me in thanking Kim and Jinfang, who are helping with that process.